Welcome back to Reddit Whispers. It began on a Tuesday, a day of the week so profoundly ordinary that it feels offensive in retrospect. Tuesdays were a symphony of controlled chaos in our house, a frantic ballet of toast, misplaced shoes, and last-minute homework checks. I was the conductor, or at least I thought I was, orchestrating the morning rush for our 5 children. There was Mateo, my eldest at 17, a silent giant who communicated in shrugs and the occasional deep sigh, already wrestling with the gravity of a world I was still trying to shield him from. Then came Sophia, 15, a whirlwind of artistic temperament and teenage angst, her moods as changeable as the weather, her love as fierce as her anger. Lucas, at 10, was my quiet observer, the one who saw everything from the periphery, his large dark eyes absorbing the family dynamic with a wisdom that sometimes unnerved me. And finally, the anchors of our chaotic little ship, the 7-year-old twins, Gabriel and Gabriella, Gabby for short. They were the laughter, the noise, the endless sticky fingerprints on every surface, the pure, unfiltered joy that reminded me why we endured the madness. That morning was no different. I was flipping pancakes, a skill I had perfected out of sheer necessity, trying to get them golden brown without turning them into charcoal discs, a feat Isabella had long since declared a lost cause for her. She was, as usual, in our bedroom, engaged in what she called her process of centering herself for the day. This involved a lot of incense, meditative music, and an impressive amount of time spent scrolling through her phone. I used to find it endearing, her quest for zen amidst the beautiful bedlam we had created. I saw it as a necessary balance to my own pragmatic, list-driven approach to life. I was the structure, she was the soul, or so I told myself. The air smelled of burnt sugar and coffee. The soundtrack was a cacophony of Gabi demanding the syrup, Gabriel recounting a dream about a superhero squirrel, and Sophia complaining that Mateo had used all the hot water again. It was home. It was our life. Isabella finally emerged, looking serene and otherworldly in a flowing white linen dress. She floated through the kitchen, kissed the tops of the twins' heads, and gave me a brief, distracted smile before pouring herself a glass of lemon water. She didn't eat breakfast with us anymore, claiming it interfered with her energy fields. I handed her a cup of coffee anyway, a silent offering of connection she rarely accepted. She took a sip, her eyes already distant. The kids were finally bundled into the minivan, a vessel that bore the scars of our family's life story in the form of juice stains and straight crayon marks. Isabella was supposed to do the school run that morning. It was her turn on our meticulously crafted schedule, the one I had laminated and stuck to the fridge. But she'd sighed and said she had an urgent call for her new online wellness venture. It was always something new, some passion project that promised fulfillment and consumed her time and our savings. I didn't argue. It was easier not to. It had become easier to just do it myself, to absorb the small imbalances to keep the peace. So I was the one buckling in the twins, listening to Sophia's playlist thumping from the back seat, and catching Mateo's eye in the rearview mirror, a shared moment of weary understanding passing between us. I remember my last words to her as I left. I just called out, "See you this afternoon, love you," and she'd waved a dismissive hand from the front porch, her phone already pressed to her ear. I pulled out of the driveway, our chaotic, imperfect, but complete little world contained within the metal and glass of the van. The school drop-off was the usual blur of, "Have a great day and don't forget your lunch." I watched Gabi and Gabriel run hand in hand toward their classroom, their small backpacks bouncing, and a wave of profound, almost painful love washed over me. This was it. This was everything. The older kids dispersed with nods and hurried goodbyes. Driving away from the school, the sudden silence in the van felt vast and welcoming. I had a few hours before I needed to be at the architecture firm, a pocket of time I planned to use to grab groceries. I pulled into the parking lot of the supermarket, the engine ticked off, and the silence returned, deeper this time. I reached for my phone to check my work emails, a reflex ingrained in modern existence. And that's when I saw it. A single message from Isabella. It wasn't on our usual chat app. It was a simple, stark SMS. 6 words that detonated my entire reality. "We're in Hawaii. Take care of the kids." My first reaction wasn't panic. It was utter blank confusion. I read it again and again. The words seemed to rearrange themselves, refusing to form a coherent thought. It had to be a joke, a profoundly stupid, unfunny joke. We? Who was we? Maybe she'd taken one of her friends on a surprise trip, and it was a poorly worded message meant for someone else, a babysitter perhaps. But we didn't have a babysitter. And why would she just leave? I called her. The phone rang once, twice, then went straight to a generic, automated voicemail. The user you were trying to reach is unavailable. I called again. Same result. A cold knot began to form in my stomach, a familiar dread I hadn't felt in years, the kind that whispers that the floor beneath your feet isn't as solid as you believed. I tried her social media, my fingers fumbling on the screen. Nothing. Her profiles were gone, deactivated. A black hole where her carefully curated life of yoga poses and inspirational quotes used to be. The knot in my stomach tightened into a fist of ice. This wasn't a joke. This was something else, something calculated. I sat in that parking lot for what felt like an eternity. The bright Brazilian sun beating down on the windshield, the cheerful chatter of shoppers passing by, sounding like a broadcast from another planet. My mind raced, trying to find a logical anchor. A family emergency? A mental health crisis? Had she been coerced? Every possibility felt both insane and more plausible than the simple, brutal truth the text suggested. I drove home in a daze, the grocery list forgotten. The house was quiet, too quiet. The remnants of our morning chaos were still there. A half-eaten piece of toast on Lucas's plate, a single pink sock belonging to Gabi lying forlornly in the hallway. It was a museum of a life that had existed only an hour ago. I walked into our bedroom. Her side of the closet was half empty. Her favorite dresses, her linen pants, her collection of sandals, gone. Her passport was missing from the drawer where we kept our important documents. The small suitcase she used for weekend trips was also gone. But the most chilling discovery was in the bathroom. Her toiletries were there, her expensive face creams and serums. But her makeup bag, the one she never went anywhere without, was gone. And on her nightstand, where her stack of self-help books usually sat, was a single pristine white envelope with my name, Juan, written on it in her elegant looping script. My heart hammered against my ribs as I picked it up. It felt impossibly light. I tore it open. Inside was not a letter, not an explanation, not an apology. It was a single professionally taken photograph. It was a picture of her on a beach, her arm around a man I vaguely recognized as Ricardo, her ridiculously handsome and much younger yoga instructor. They were both smiling, radiant, sun-kissed. Behind them, a turquoise ocean stretched to the horizon. She was wearing a bikini and a flower in her hair. She looked happier, more vibrant than I had seen her in years. There was no note. The picture was the note. The text was the explanation. We're in Hawaii. The we was not a friend. The we was him. The rest of the day passed in a thick, suffocating fog. I moved on autopilot. I made calls. I called her mother, who burst into tears and confessed that Isabella had been distant for months, talking about feeling unseen and unfulfilled. I called her sister, who reacted with cold fury, telling me Isabella was a selfish fool but offering no real insight. They were as blindsided as I was. The betrayal was a physical thing, a crushing weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe. It wasn't just that she had left, it was the cruelty of it. The text message, the photograph, the silence. She hadn't given me the dignity of a conversation. She hadn't given her children the respect of a goodbye. She had simply vanished, leaving a digital taunt in her wake. The hours ticked by. 3 o'clock arrived with the crushing finality of a death sentence. I had to go and pick up the kids. I had to face them. I had to stand in front of my 5 children and somehow explain that their mother was gone. How do you tell a 7-year-old that their mommy chose a man with a six-pack and a beach over them? How do you explain to a teenage girl who worships her mother that that worship was a one-way street? How do you look your eldest son in the eye, the one who already carries too much, and add the weight of his mother's abandonment to his shoulders? I stood at the school gates, my smile a brittle mask. The twins ran to me first, their faces alight with the simple joy of seeing their father. They wrapped their arms around my legs, chattering about their day. Lucas followed, giving me his usual quiet nod. Then came Sophia, headphones on, lost in her own world. A flash of annoyance on her face when she saw it was me and not her mother in the driver's seat. Mateo was the last, his gait slow, his eyes scanning the car. He didn't have to ask. The question was in the set of his jaw. The drive home was a cacophony of questions. Where's Mom? Is Mom working late? Mom promised she'd help me with my art project. I offered vague, pathetic excuses. She had to go away for a little while. It was an emergency. The lies tasted like ash in my mouth. Back at the house, the silence from the morning had been replaced by a tense, expectant energy. They knew. They didn't know the details, but they felt the tectonic shift in our family's foundation. I gathered them in the living room, the same room where we'd celebrated birthdays and opened Christmas presents, the epicenter of our family life. They sat before me, a jury of 5, their faces a mixture of confusion, fear, and dawning heartbreak. I looked at their faces, these 5 perfect, innocent souls I had created with a woman who was now sipping a cocktail on the other side of the world, and my carefully constructed composure crumbled. I told them the truth, or a version of it. I left out the yoga instructor for now. I simply said that their mother had decided to go on a long trip, that she needed some time for herself, and that I didn't know when she would be back. The reactions were as varied and as devastating as I had feared. The twins' faces crumpled, their bottom lips trembling before they burst into tears, a heartbreaking sound of pure, uncomprehending loss. Lucas just stared at the floor, his small shoulders hunched, retreating so far into himself he practically disappeared. Sophia exploded, a torrent of furious, tearful accusations poured out of her. It was my fault. I was boring. I worked too much. I didn't appreciate her. She was defending a woman who had just abandoned her, a testament to the complex, unshakable bond between a teenage daughter and her mother. But it was Mateo's reaction that shattered me the most. He didn't cry. He didn't yell. He just stood up, his face a mask of stone, and walked over to the twins. He knelt down and pulled them both into his arms, murmuring reassurances to them. He looked up at me, and in his 17-year-old eyes, I saw the death of his childhood. He was no longer just my son. He was my partner in this catastrophe. That night, I put the 5 of them to bed. I sat with the twins until their sobs subsided into shuddering breaths of sleep. I tried to talk to Lucas, but he had built a wall around himself that I couldn't breach. I listened to Sophia cry through her bedroom door, ignoring my gentle knocks. And I sat with Mateo in the kitchen until long after midnight, not speaking, just sharing the heavy silence, the unspoken understanding that our lives would never be the same. When I finally went to my own bed, the empty space beside me felt like a physical void, a cold spot that radiated loss. I picked up my phone, a foolish, masochistic impulse, and looked at the text message one more time. "We're in Hawaii. Take care of the kids." It was a command, a delegation of duty. She hadn't asked, she had instructed. I was no longer her husband, her partner, the father of her children. I was the hired help she had left behind to clean up her mess. And as I lay there in the dark, listening to the sounds of my children's unsettled sleep, a new emotion began to smolder beneath the shock and the grief. It was a cold, hard, and utterly clarifying rage. The long night had just begun. The days that followed the initial explosion bled into a gray, disorienting blur of survival. The world didn't stop from my personal apocalypse. The kids still had to go to school. Homework still had to be done. Mouths still needed to be fed. I was operating in a state of perpetual high-alert exhaustion, a single soldier fighting a war on 5 different fronts. The logistical challenges alone were a mountain. I had a demanding job as an architect, a profession that requires precision, creativity, and focus, 3 things that had evaporated from my life overnight. My mind, which was once filled with blueprints and load-bearing calculations, was now a chaotic spreadsheet of PTA meetings, soccer practice schedules, dental appointments, and the ever-present terrifying question of what to make for dinner. I became a master of the one-pot meal, an expert in stain removal, and a connoisseur of mediocre frozen pizzas. The house, once a source of pride, began to show signs of the siege. A permanent mountain of laundry established itself in the utility room, a silent, mocking testament to my inability to keep up. Dishes were a constant battle. The cheerful order Isabella had maintained, or, as I now realized, had overseen while I did most of the actual work, was replaced by a kind of functional, lived-in chaos. My mornings became a frantic race against the clock, a desperate attempt to get 5 people of varying ages and levels of cooperation dressed, fed, and out the door. More than once, I arrived at my office with baby food on my tie or Agabi's glittery hair clip stuck to my jacket, catching the sympathetic, pitying glances of my coworkers. I had to have a meeting with my boss, a kind but firm man named Arthur. I laid out the situation, stripped of its emotional drama, presenting it as a logistical problem. My wife has left. I am the sole caregiver for 5 children. I need flexibility. The words felt foreign and shameful. To my immense relief, he was understanding. He allowed me to work from home 3 days a week, a lifeline that I clung to desperately. But the practicalities were just the surface layer of the nightmare. The real damage was emotional, a deep, structural wound to the foundation of our family. Each of my children was processing their mother's abandonment in their own destructive way. Sophia, my vibrant, artistic daughter, turned her grief into a razor-sharp weapon. She became defiant, argumentative, and cruel. She would scream at me that I didn't understand anything, that I had driven her mother away. She would praise Isabella, creating a fantasy of a perfect, free-spirited mother who was too good for our boring suburban life. She dyed her hair a shocking shade of pink without asking, a visual scream for attention. She would lock herself in her room for hours, and I would hear her sobbing, a sound that tore me apart. I tried to reach her, to offer comfort, but my every attempt was met with a wall of hostility. I was the jailer, the symbol of the life that had trapped her glorious mother. Lucas, my quiet boy, retreated even further into silence. He stopped talking almost completely, communicating only in shrugs and shakes of the head. He spent all his time in his room, building intricate Lego worlds, entire cities with walls and moats. He was creating a space he could control, a universe where people didn't just disappear without a word. His teacher called me, concerned. His grades were slipping. He wasn't interacting with other children on the playground. He just sat alone, watching. I would sit with him in his room, not pushing him to talk, just being present, hoping my proximity could offer some comfort. Sometimes he would let me hand him a specific Lego piece he needed, a tiny, fleeting moment of connection in his self-imposed exile. The twins were a raw, open wound of confusion. Gabi started having terrible nightmares. She would wake up screaming for her mommy, her small body trembling. I would hold her, rocking her back and forth, my own heart breaking with every sob. Gabriel, on the other hand, developed a nervous tic, a constant blinking, and became intensely, almost pathologically clingy. He would not let me out of his sight. If I went to the bathroom, he would stand outside the door. He was terrified that I would vanish too. I was their only anchor in a storm, and they were clinging on with all their might. And then there was Mateo, my son, my stoic 17-year-old boy. He tried so hard to be the man of the house. He shouldered a burden no teenager should ever have to bear. He helped me with the twins. He tried to reason with Sophia. He made sure the younger ones did their homework. He never complained. But I saw the toll it was taking. I saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the way the light had gone out of them. He gave up his spot on the soccer team, saying he didn't have time. He stopped hanging out with his friends. He was sacrificing his own youth on the altar of our family's crisis. One evening, I found him in the garage punching an old heavy bag we had hanging there, his face streaked with tears and sweat. He didn't stop when he saw me. He just kept punching, letting out all the rage and pain he kept bottled up inside. I didn't say a word. I just stood there and watched my son fight the ghosts of his mother's betrayal, and I felt a fresh wave of hatred for Isabella so intense it almost made me sick. Amidst this emotional wreckage, I had to deal with the financial fallout. I finally got access to our joint bank accounts. They were almost empty. Isabella had systematically drained our savings over the course of several weeks leading up to her departure. Thousands of dollars, money we had saved for a down payment on a bigger house, for the kids' college funds, for our future. It was all gone.
A single credit card transaction stood out. 2 one-way first-class tickets to Honolulu, purchased a month before she left. The planning, the cold, calculated deception of it all was breathtaking. She hadn't just left us, she had robbed us. She had stolen her children's future to finance her new life. The photograph she'd left behind now seemed even more obscene. Her radiant smile wasn't one of spontaneous joy. It was the smug grin of a thief who had gotten away with the heist. This discovery was a turning point for me. The grief, the hurt, the self-blame that had been churning inside me began to cool and harden into something else: resolve. She had left me with nothing but 5 broken children and a mountain of debt. I could either drown in it or I could start to build a raft. I chose to build. I started with small things, creating new routines, new traditions that were ours and ours alone. We started Friday night movie nights, all of us piled on the couch with popcorn and blankets. I started cooking with the twins, letting them make a mess, focusing on the joy of creating something together rather than the perfection of the result. I took Lucas to a model train exhibition, and for the first time in weeks, I saw a flicker of his old enthusiasm. I bought a new sketchbook for Sophia and left it on her bed without a word. A few days later, I saw her using it, her brow furrowed in concentration. They were tiny victories, almost imperceptible shifts, but they were a start. I filed for divorce. The process was sickeningly simple. Since she had abandoned us and her whereabouts were unknown, the court moved quickly. I was granted full custody of the children and sole ownership of the house she had so callously used as collateral for her escape. The legal documents arrived, and I was officially a single father. The finality of it was both terrifying and liberating. The illusion of our marriage, the ghost of the woman I thought I knew, was finally exorcised. There was no more waiting by the phone, no more foolish hope that she would come to her senses and return. There was only us, me and the kids. A new, smaller, but fiercely loyal unit. Months crawled by. The raw agony of the first few weeks slowly subsided into a chronic, dull ache. We were adjusting. Our new normal was taking shape. It was loud, it was messy, it was imperfect, but it was ours. I learned the names of all my children's teachers. I knew which twin hated crusts on their sandwiches and which one loved them. I learned to braid Gabi's hair, my clumsy architect's fingers slowly mastering the intricate weaves. I learned to listen to Sophia's music without judgment, and sometimes she would even take her headphones off and talk to me about a song. Mateo started seeing his friends again on the weekends, and though I missed his presence, I was relieved to see him reclaiming a piece of his own life. We were scarred, yes. We were a family redefined by loss, but we were not broken. We were surviving. And sometimes, in the quiet moments, late at night after everyone was asleep, I would sit in the living room and feel a strange sense of peace. The house no longer felt empty. It felt full. Full of my children's resilience, their laughter, their love. It was a home built not on a foundation of lies and secrets, but on the simple, unshakable truth that we had each other. One evening, about 6 months after she'd left, I was cleaning out some old boxes in the attic. Tucked away in a dusty corner, I found a box of Isabella's old journals from before we were married. I hesitated, feeling like an intruder. But a morbid curiosity, a need to understand the person who had detonated my life, took over.
I opened one. Her handwriting was the same, but the person writing was a stranger. She wrote of grand passions, of a life lived without limits, of a soul that could not be caged. She wrote about her dreams of being an artist, a poet, a world traveler. And then, as the entries got closer to our wedding date, a new tone emerged. She wrote about me. I was her safe harbor, her rock. She loved me, she wrote, because I was stable, because I was kind, because I could give her the family she thought she wanted. Reading those words, I finally understood. I had never been the love of her life. I had been a choice, a practical decision. She had tried to fit herself into a life she wasn't built for, and our children and I were the beautiful, inconvenient consequences of that decision. She hadn't abandoned us because she had fallen out of love with me. She had abandoned us because she had never been in love with the life we had built, only the idea of it. And when that idea was no longer enough, she had simply moved on to the next one. Closing that journal, I didn't feel anger. I felt a profound, liberating pity. For her, for the woman who would spend her entire life chasing a fantasy, leaving a trail of real, human wreckage in her wake. I took the box of journals downstairs, put them in the fireplace, and struck a match. I watched as the pages of her past, our past, curled into black ash. It was a baptism by fire. The old life was gone. It was time to build the new one. The first year without Isabella was about survival. The second year was about healing. A fragile, tentative kind of healing, like the first green shoots pushing through scorched earth. The rhythms of our new life had become second nature. The morning rush was still chaotic, but it was our chaos, a familiar dance we all knew the steps to. My work-from-home arrangement had become permanent, allowing me the flexibility I needed to be the father my children deserved. The mountain of laundry was still a formidable peak, but we had implemented a system. Even the twins were responsible for putting their own clothes away, a task they performed with a mixture of solemn importance and creative interpretation of where socks were supposed to live. Our house, which had once felt like a tomb of memories, now felt like a home again. It was filled with the evidence of our lives. Sophia's paintings were taped to the fridge, Lucas's intricate Lego creations occupied every flat surface, and the scuff marks on the walls were from impromptu soccer games in the hallway. The ghost of Isabella still lingered in the quiet moments, in a particular slant of light or a song on the radio. But her presence was fading, like an old photograph left out in the sun. The ache in my chest had become a scar, a reminder of a wound that had closed. My children, my resilient, incredible children, were finding their way back to themselves. Mateo had not only rejoined the soccer team, but had been made captain. He had a newfound confidence, a quiet strength forged in the fires of our crisis. He was applying to universities, looking at engineering programs, his future a bright, open road. He and I had developed a new relationship, one built on mutual respect. We were no longer just father and son, we were partners, survivors. Sophia had found her voice, not in anger, but in her art. She had won a local art competition for a powerful charcoal drawing she had done of 5 disparate figures huddled together against a storm. She titled it Us. She was still a teenager, with all the requisite eye-rolling and mood swings, but the brittle anger had been replaced by a fierce, protective love for her family. She had started talking to a school counselor, a step she had taken on her own, and it was helping her untangle the complex knot of love and resentment she felt for her mother. Lucas had started to talk again. It happened gradually. First it was single words, then short sentences. Then, one evening at dinner, he launched into a detailed 20-minute explanation of the aerodynamics of his latest Lego spaceship. The rest of us sat in stunned, happy silence, just letting him talk. He had found a friend at school, another quiet boy who shared his passion for building things. His teacher reported that he was smiling in class. He was emerging from his shell, blinking in the sunlight. The twins, Gabriel and Gabi, were thriving. The nightmares had faded, replaced by dreams of dragons and princesses. They were happy, boisterous, and secure. They rarely mentioned their mother anymore. To them, she was a vague, distant memory, a character from the before time. I was their sun, their moon, and their stars. Their unconditional love was a balm to my weary soul. With the family unit stabilizing, I began to realize that I had been so focused on being a father that I had completely forgotten how to be João. My life revolved entirely around the children's needs. My social life consisted of conversations with other parents at the school gates. I looked in the mirror one day and saw a stranger. I was tired, I had gained weight, and my eyes had a permanent haunted look. I decided it was time to reclaim a small piece of myself. I started waking up an hour before the kids, using the quiet time to exercise. I reconnected with old friends, forcing myself to go out for a beer or a coffee, to talk about things other than homework and orthodontist appointments. It felt strange at first, like speaking a foreign language I had forgotten, but slowly I started to feel like a person again, not just a function. It was during this period of tentative self-rediscovery that I met Livia. She was a music teacher at the twin school, a woman with a kind smile and eyes that seemed to hold a deep, gentle wisdom. I had seen her 100 times at school events, but we had never really spoken beyond a polite hello. Then one afternoon, I was late to pick up the twins. I came rushing into the school, flustered and apologetic, to find Gabi and Gabriel sitting in her classroom, happily drawing while she played a soft melody on the piano. She hadn't been annoyed or put out by my lateness. She had simply created a pocket of peace for them. She looked up and smiled, and in that simple, unforced gesture, I felt a warmth I hadn't realized I'd been missing. We started talking, just small talk at first, about the kids, about the school, but it soon deepened. I found myself looking forward to those brief conversations at the end of the school day. Livia was easy to talk to. She was a listener, a rare quality in a world full of people waiting for their turn to speak. She had a quiet strength about her, a sense of being completely comfortable in her own skin. She had never been married and had no children of her own, but she had a natural, nurturing spirit that drew people to her. One day, she mentioned a local community concert her students were performing in and shyly invited me and the kids. I almost said no, my default setting being to decline anything that might disrupt our fragile routine. But looking at her hopeful face, I heard myself say yes. That Saturday, we all went to the concert. The kids were hesitant at first, but Livia's students were incredible, and soon we were all captivated. After the show, Livia came to find us, her face flushed with pride. She didn't focus on me. She knelt down and spoke to each of the children, asking them which song was their favorite, genuinely interested in their opinions. Lucas, my silent boy, talked to her for 5 solid minutes about the cello. I watched them, a strange feeling blooming in my chest. It wasn't the fiery, passionate attraction I had once felt for Isabella.
This was something different. It was quieter, calmer, and felt infinitely more real. It felt like peace. I asked her to have coffee with me the following week. It wasn't a date, not really. It was just 2 adults talking. I told her about my life, about Isabella. I didn't hold back. I told her about the text message, the empty bank accounts, the broken hearts of my children. I laid the wreckage of my past at her feet, half expecting her to run. She didn't. She just listened, her compassionate eyes never leaving mine. When I was finished, she reached across the table and briefly touched my hand. It was a small gesture, but it felt monumental. It was the first time in 2 years that I had felt a woman's touch that wasn't a hug from one of my children. And it didn't feel like pity. It felt like understanding. Our coffee meetings became a regular thing. They evolved into walks in the park, and then, one evening, I cooked dinner for her at my house after the kids were in bed. It was terrifying. Inviting a woman into this space that was so deeply defined by Isabella's absence felt like a betrayal. But as Livia sat at my kitchen table, laughing as I nearly burned the garlic bread, it didn't feel wrong. It felt right. She fit. She wasn't trying to fill the space Isabella had left. She was creating her own space, one filled with warmth and genuine kindness. Introducing her to the children as more than just their teacher was a delicate operation. I did it slowly. She started joining us for our Friday movie nights. She didn't try to be a mother figure. She was just Livia, a fun adult who was good at making popcorn and knew all the words to their favorite movie songs. The twins adored her immediately. They would climb into her lap, showing her their drawings. Lucas enjoyed talking to her about books and music. Sophia was the most resistant. She was fiercely loyal to the idealized memory of her mother. She was polite to Livia, but distant, watching her with a critical eye. Livia, with her infinite patience, never pushed. She gave Sophia her space, always treating her with respect and kindness. The turning point came a few months later. Sophia was struggling with a music theory assignment. She was frustrated, on the verge of tears, and lashing out at me for not being able to help. Livia, who had come over for dinner, gently offered to take a look. She sat with Sophia at the dining room table for over an hour, not giving her the answers, but patiently explaining the concepts in a way Sophia could understand. At the end of it, Sophia looked up, a rare, genuine smile on her face, and said, "Thanks, Livia. You're better at this than Mom was." It was a simple statement, but it was everything. It was an acknowledgement. It was acceptance. That night, after Livia had gone home, Mateo came and sat with me in the living room. He was quiet for a long time, and then he said, "She's a good person, Dad. Livia, she makes you happy." I looked at my son, this wise old soul in a teenager's body, and I felt a surge of love and gratitude. "Yes," I said, the truth of the words settling deep in my bones. "Yes, she does." A few weeks later, on a lazy Sunday afternoon, our whole chaotic, beautiful, cobbled-together family was in the backyard. I was manning the grill, Livia was in a fierce water gun battle with the twins, Sophia was sketching in her notepad under a tree, and Lucas and Mateo were trying to teach the dog a new trick. Laughter filled the air. It was a simple, perfect moment of domestic bliss. I looked around at the scene, at these people I loved so much, and a profound realization washed over me. I was happy, genuinely, deeply happy. The gaping wound left by Isabella's departure had finally, truly healed. Her absence was no longer a defining presence in our lives. It was just an absence. We had not just survived, we had built something new, something stronger, something better. We had moved on. And in that moment of perfect contentment, I had no idea that the ghost of our past was about to come roaring back to life, furious that we had dared to stop haunting the house she had abandoned. It happened on a Saturday morning, almost 3 years to the day after she had left. The ordinariness of the moment was a cruel echo of her departure. Livia was with us, a regular and beloved fixture of our weekends now. She was in the kitchen with the twins, making a glorious mess with flour and chocolate chips as they attempted to bake cookies. Lucas and Mateo were engrossed in a video game, their good-natured shouts filling the family room. Sophia was at a friend's house. I was in the front yard, trying to wrestle a ridiculously overgrown hedge into submission. The sun was warm, the air was filled with the scent of cut grass and the sound of my children's laughter. It was a perfect, peaceful domestic scene, a symbol of everything we had rebuilt. That's when the car pulled up. A sleek, expensive rental, the kind of car that feels out of place in a suburban neighborhood of minivans and sensible sedans. It parked directly in front of our house. I paused, hedge clippers in hand, a mild curiosity stirring. Then the driver's side door opened, and she stepped out, Isabella. She was different, yet terrifyingly the same. Her hair was blonder, her skin a deep golden tan. She wore expensive-looking white linen pants and a silk top, an outfit that screamed effortless wealth. A pair of designer sunglasses was perched on her head. She looked like a woman who had just stepped off the cover of a travel magazine. But as she took off the sunglasses, I saw her eyes. They were the same. The same restless, searching eyes that had looked at me with a distracted smile on that last morning. For a moment, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. It felt like a hallucination, a phantom from a past life materializing in my front yard. My heart began to pound a frantic, heavy rhythm against my ribs. The hedge clippers fell from my numb fingers, landing with a soft thud in the grass. She saw me and smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It wasn't apologetic. It was a bright, confident, almost triumphant smile. The smile of a queen returning to her kingdom, expecting a parade. She glided up the driveway, her movements as fluid and graceful as I remembered.
She stopped a few feet from me, her gaze sweeping over the house, the yard, and then me. Her smile faltered slightly as she took in my appearance. My old t-shirt stained with grass, my paint-splattered jeans. I was no longer the young, ambitious architect she had married. I was a middle-aged single dad who trimmed his own hedges. Her expression was one of faint, clinical disappointment. She didn't say hello. She didn't say she was sorry. Her first words to me after 3 years of absolute silence were, "The house could use a new coat of paint, Joanne." The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it was what snapped me out of my shock. The fear and confusion were instantly vaporized by a wave of cold, clear anger. I didn't respond. I just stared at her, my silence a wall she hadn't anticipated. She seemed momentarily flustered, her social script failing her. She clearly expected tears, or yelling, or a dramatic collapse into her arms. She didn't expect this calm, quiet emptiness. Before she could speak again, the front door opened. Gabby and Gabriel came running out, their faces and hands covered in flour. Livia following behind them, laughing. "Daddy, look, we're bakers," Gabby shouted, holding up her sticky hands. Then they saw Isabella. They stopped dead in their tracks. Their laughter died. They stared at the strange, glamorous woman standing in their yard. They didn't run to her. They didn't cry out, "Mommy." They just looked at her with the blank, cautious curiosity of children looking at a stranger. Then, in a movement that was more damning than any words could ever be, they both turned and ran back, not to me, but to Livia, each of them grabbing one of her hands and partially hiding behind her legs. I watched Isabella's face as she registered this. The confident smile vanished completely. It was replaced by a flicker of confusion, which quickly hardened into a mask of offense. She looked at Livia, her gaze dripping with disdain, a dismissive up-and-down glance that took in Livia's simple jeans and t-shirt. She looked at the children hiding behind this other woman, and the offense in her eyes began to curdle into something darker. "And who is this?" Isabella asked, her voice laced with a saccharine sweetness that didn't quite mask the steel beneath it. Livia, bless her heart, handled it with her usual grace. She gave a small, polite nod. "I'm Livia," she said simply, her voice calm and steady. She didn't offer any further explanation. She didn't need to. Her presence there, the way the twins clung to her, was explanation enough. Isabella ignored her, turning her attention back to me. Her eyes were narrowed now. "So this is what you've been doing, replacing me?" The word replacing hung in the air, thick with accusation. The sheer narcissism was staggering. In her mind, our lives had been in a state of suspended animation for 3 years, waiting for her to press play again. The idea that we had not just survived, but had built a new, happy life without her was not just a surprise, it was a personal insult. At that moment, Mateo and Lucas, drawn by the sudden silence, appeared at the front door. Lucas's eyes went wide when he saw her, and he immediately stepped back behind his older brother. But Mateo, my son who had become a man in her absence, stepped forward. He didn't look at her with anger or with sadness. He looked at her with a kind of weary pity. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice low and steady. It wasn't the voice of a son greeting his long-lost mother. It was the voice of a protector, a guardian of the peace she was threatening to shatter. Her face tightened. "Mateo, is that any way to speak to your mother? I'm home." The word home was a weapon she tried to wield, but it had lost all its power. This wasn't her home anymore. She was a tourist here, a visitor from a foreign land. "No," Mateo said, his voice unwavering. "You're not. This is our home. You left." The simple, brutal truth of his words seemed to finally break through her wall of self-delusion. Her face, her beautifully preserved, sun-kissed face, began to contort with rage. This was not the homecoming she had imagined.
There were no tearful reunions, no prodigal mother welcomed back into the fold. There was just this quiet, unified front of a family that had closed ranks without her.
Her fury, when it finally erupted, was a sight to behold. It wasn't loud or hysterical. It was a cold, venomous tirade, delivered in a low, seething voice. She directed it at me. How dare I? How dare I move on? How dare I let another woman near her children? How dare I poison them against her? She spoke of her time in Hawaii not as an abandonment, but as a necessary journey of self-discovery. She had needed to find herself so she could be a better mother, a better person. She had done this for us, she claimed, her voice dripping with self-righteousness. She had expected to return to a family that was broken, pining for her, ready to welcome their radiant, enlightened matriarch back to the throne. The reality of our happiness, our wholeness without her, was an unbearable affront to her ego. It proved that she was not, in fact, the center of our universe, and that made her furious. I listened to it all without saying a word. I let her empty herself of all her poison. And as I listened, I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt nothing. The woman I had once loved, the mother of my children, was gone. In her place stood this stranger, a hollow creature consumed by her own selfishness. I was looking at a ghost. When she finally ran out of breath, her chest heaving, her eyes blazing, I finally spoke. My voice was quiet, devoid of all emotion. "You need to leave, Isabella." She stared at me, dumbfounded. "What? This is my house. These are my children." "No," I said, shaking my head slowly. "It stopped being your house the day you emptied our bank accounts. They stopped being just your children the day you left them a 6-word text message and flew to paradise. They are my children. This is our home, and you are not welcome here." I saw it then, the moment she truly understood, the moment she realized that she had no power here anymore. The love, the fear, the hold she had over me, it was all gone, and its absence terrified her. She looked from my face to Mateo's stony expression, to Sophia, who had just arrived home and was now standing beside her brother, her arms crossed, to Lucas peeking from behind the door, to the twins clinging to Livia's hands. She saw a complete, unbroken circle that she was on the outside of. Her face crumpled. The rage gave way to a desperate, theatrical display of tears. She sobbed about how she had made a terrible mistake, how she missed us all so much, how Ricardo had left her for a younger woman. It was a performance, a last-ditch effort to manipulate her way back in. But it was too late. We had all seen the real person behind the mask. The applause was over. The theater was empty. Livia, ever the soul of grace, gently led the twins inside, shielding them from the ugly spectacle. Mateo stepped forward and stood beside me. "You heard him," he said to Isabella. "It's time for you to go." Isabella stared at her eldest son, the boy she had abandoned, now a man who was quietly but firmly banishing her from his life. That look on his face was the final blow. Her tears stopped. Her face became a blank mask of defeat. Without another word, she turned around, walked back to her expensive rental car, and drove away. We stood there for a long time, watching the car disappear down the street. The quiet returned, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was the calm after a storm has passed, leaving the air clean and fresh. We had faced the ghost of our past, and we had not flinched. We were home. We were safe. If you're still with me, I want to know, what was the moment that made you realize someone wasn't who you thought they were? Share your story in the comments. And if you enjoyed this, hit that like button and subscribe to Reddit Whispers, where the most unforgettable true stories find their voice.